This is really fascinating. I've been invited by Liam to try to put mind mapping in context. So we had a couple of interesting phone calls about it, and what I'm going to do in this presentation is I was trying to decide what media to use. We're now experiencing a huge amount of electronic media, not the least of which is all the mind mapping software. But I'm going to be working in Sketchbook Pro from Autodesk. Which, for those of us who work interactively, is the most supple, flexible drawing program for an iPad or a computer. And the reason that I'm going to do that is, as some of you may notice, that I was drawing on this beforehand, is that I can have an image and draw on it with some precision. PowerPoint is really like drawing with a bar of soap. It's not really what you want to do. And what I'm going to be talking about is mind mapping and a framework for thinking about the whole world of visualization. And I want to do it in two chunks. One is to just make some brief introductory comments about why I think there's a revolution going on and why I think you're in the right place at the right time. And in a way, it's sort of an answer to your question, although I wouldn't be so narrow to say mind mapping will save the world. I would say visualization, a little more broadly, is absolutely required to be a contemporary thinker and a systems thinker. And I will make the case for where I think mind mapping is at its strongest, and also where it tends to be a little bit limited. But the main thing is to get you to understand that there's a whole spectrum of things out there. In 2008, an editor from Wiley & Sons called up and said, you know, Dan Rome's book, Back of the Napkin, is flying off the shelves. Slidology by Nancy Duarte. If you haven't been following her work, oh my gosh, she's really terrific. She's got a new one, Resonance, and she's got a new PDF thing that's for free, you know, on how to do slide docs, which you really ought to look into. Anyway, so I've been noticing your website and what you guys do, and there isn't any literature on doing visualization with groups, really. Would you want to write some? And so 4 years later, we've got a whole series. And I did bring 3, and when we go into the question period at 10 minutes of, I'm going to remove this little box podium here, and anybody who wants to be in a quick raffle, put your business card in there, and we will raffle off the $3. I mean, I'll just pull out business cards and give them to you. Visual Meetings is all about, it's really a retro book, but it's about you know, how do you design and run and document meetings with visuals? And the group graphics keyboard, which is what we're going to talk about today, is unpacked in this in detail. And this was a framework that was developed in 1976, actually in a completely deductive manner, working with a very rigorous theory of process, which was by Arthur M. Young, who said that process is more important than structure. Very interesting thing to remember here. We'll get into that a little more. Visual Teams takes that and says, okay, if you are running good visual meetings, how do you do it over the whole arc of Teams work? And Teams have meeting, but they also have little mini projects, and they also have all kinds of web emails and stuff. And the whole question is, how do you see what you're doing over time? So that's what that deals with. And it also is using visualization to understand team dynamics. And this last one is really aimed at managers and the whole making a case of why organizations need to be visually literate. So in some ways I'm answering your question, Liam, about, you know, why, so what? So I thought it was an interesting sign of the times that those have been bestsellers. They're now in about 9, 10 languages, and people from all over the world are now calling them. It seems like Paul Sappho, who some of you may know, who's a forecaster, likes to say it takes 30 years to be an overnight success. Well, I remember back when I saw my first graphic on a wall from Jeff Ball in 1972, and said, oh my gosh, I can do that. And you know, the rest is history. I've been drawing on the wall ever since. Back in those days, it was Sharpies and acetates. Was, you know, Gary Hamill, who went to business school, I mean, it's amazing with Sharpies and acetates. And you could do a lot with those, but you were basically into slides. I don't think we had digital photography. There was no laser printers. There was no internet. I mean, it was really an incredible time. And the Harvard Business Club didn't allow people to take notes in there, because if you were not smart enough to remember, you shouldn't be in there. And so this whole idea of being explicit with visuals wasn't really something that anybody other than architects and designers decided to do. Well, I want to take you into this. I've handed out this sheet, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on it, but a guy named Everett Lindquist was an analyst in Australia having to advise the politicians on stuff that the analysts came up with, and got very interested in visual presentation as a possible way to do that, and wrote up a white paper basically saying that there are, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do, how do I do this way? I'm trying to zoom, but it's making me write. When this isn't attached, it works great. Try that. So I'll have to unattach it, detach it. Graphic design has been visual since the very beginning. This is a little picture of Leonardo over there. And I don't really need to explain why it's useful for designers. I mean, that's been going on for years. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that data visualization is its own huge domain. And maybe some of you feel like you have a tap in there, but if you haven't seen Hans Rosling's data visualization thing, this is a TED Talk. I mean, actually it's a BBC thing, but if you Google Hans Rosling, R-O-S-L-I-N-G, this is an animated depiction of basically average income against health. And it's absolutely amazing what you can do now with that. So I'm not going to get into all that scientific visualization. This has been the world that I've been living in, which is the world of information, the world of visual facilitation. And this little graphic down here is kind of a canonical picture of where I've been living, which is in U-shaped groups with a display on one side. And what we pioneered in the 70s was the basic process of having the group talk rather than the presenter talk initially, so this is a little bit ironic what's happening right now, and seeing on the screen what they say. So it's basically taking all the tools of visualization and reversing the flow such that you're using all that to listen with. And that is an incredible shift in a group process when they have a working display. Some of you, how many of you worked interactively with Mindshed or mind mapping software or whatever? It's pretty interesting when you get the group to build it with you. If you've done that kind of thing, it's a very different energy than trying to present from one of these. So we've been doing it mostly with paper, and I'll show you where it's kind of going. And then I added a fourth, which is what I call cognitive visualization. And I think what's going on between the ears is as important as what's going on the display. And in fact, I would make the case in the Visual Leader book that it's the inadequacy of our mental models that is keeping us from really some of the cross-boundary collaborations that we need to do to solve things like climate change. Is people have such different frames. And if you think about it for a second, I don't believe any of your brains have ever been outside the skull. That means, you know, what is going on between your ears is illusory. I mean, you are basically taking sense data and crafting something. And so the whole question is, how do you upgrade a mental model that's been neurologically baked in? Particularly if you happen to be successful. You know, it's really a sad thing that successful people have a great deal of trouble changing. Well, part of it is it's all in your nerves. And so one of the things I've discovered with this interactive way of working as opposed to a presentative way of working is it's a great way to basically upset mental models. If you try to do a mind map of somebody's mental model, you will create enormous confusion and disturbance in the field of their awareness, because it's absolutely infinite in how many little branches you can go to. And you can push anybody way beyond what they know. And then you start making these weird associations. Have any of you ever tried to do a Girdlesher Bach on a mind map where you take the tendrils and bring it? I mean, the fact that it's still in flatland is one of the challenges. By the way, I've tried doing some of this stuff in Second Life. I tried doing a mind map in Second Life. It was interesting. Actually, if you go to Second Life, the Grove, there is a map of our network in 3D that is basically a mind map, but I mean, it's a system diagram. So, I'm basically here making the case that there is a visual revolution going on. It is absolutely exploding. Every one of those Venn diagrams has associations, having meetings like this, you know, all kinds of software being developed for all these different things. It is just going crazy. How many of you agree with that? Are any of you unsure? What's your unsureness?
From my experience, some people just don't relate to it. So I understand mind maps and love them, but I work with people who look at them and go, what's that about? And to me, there's bullet point people and there's mind mapping people.
I didn't say that there was a mind mapping revolution. I was saying there's a visualization revolution. I don't know about mind mapping. I'm kind of interested. It's the way it's happening. I think it's probably growing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going here. The caption on this is one of the cartoons from the book, is what's all this? Have any of you looked at PowerPoint templates that are built in? All right, and you work? Okay, I want to do an activity here. I think people are highly, highly visual now. I mean, we basically are the most visual culture that, well, maybe not more than Aborigines, because they actually had to use their eyes to hunt with and stuff, but all media now is text and graphics together, most of it. Instagram, Facebook, any of this, even LinkedIn's gone visual. Wall Street Journal has colored photos. What we aren't taught is how to use it like language. We're actually being taught to consume a lot of visuals that are designed by other people. And PowerPoint are all over the place. And there are all kinds of graphic formats there. So what I want to do is to have an initial activity where on your table you have some little paper and you have some pens. I want you to just create a blizzard of different graphic frameworks that you see used a lot at work. Now, what do I mean by a framework? If you squint at a drawing, you will see a pattern. So if you squint at a mind map, you see like a tree pattern. Now, you see lots of differences in that, but essentially nodes that are connected. Is that correct? So that's one kind of pattern. What's an example of another kind of pattern that's a whole pattern? Because somebody shouted out. A grid. Okay, so where am I going here? Why is it not? You know why it's not? Because I'm on the wrong layer. Isn't software wonderful?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay, so a grid A grid pattern, if you squint at it, is like this, right? What's another pattern?
Bar chart.
A bar chart. Okay, a bar chart has axes and then it's got bars, oddly enough. And a tree, like a decision tree, you go turn, etc. So, just in a couple of minutes, generate as many of those as you can at your table, of ones you actually see used in the work. And just draw a little quick picture and share it with folks. I mean, just kind of create a constellation in the middle of your table. We're going to come back to this little gallery of possibilities here, and I'm going to kind of walk you through making sense out of this. But there are hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of things, as I will point out. Now, I want to start out by kind of giving you a forewarning of where I'm going to be coming from, and I've already given you a little bit of a tip-off on that. I think PowerPoint is really an amazing program, and you could substitute PowerPoint for MindJet or, mind mapping software, whatever ones. There's a new one out called Bubbletree, if any of you haven't seen that. Have any of you seen Bubbletree?
Yeah.
Google Bubbletree. It's really interesting. It's sort of a user-friendly brain, but it's optimized for collaboration and sharing trees with one another. Why do you think PowerPoint is so wonderful? Why would I put a slide up here that says PowerPoint's a blessing?
It comes with Office.
Huh? It comes with Office. Okay?
You can get ideas really quickly. For group discussions. It's more collaborative than a lot of other software.
It's more collaborative.
But what I mean by that is it's meant to be shared.
It's meant to be shared. Okay. It's visual.
Widespread.
Widespread.
It's quick. It's really quick. You can get
It's
stuff
quick.
done really quickly. Yeah.
Speaks all
It
languages.
seems like it's the tool to disseminate ideas in certain
Yeah.
corporate. I can post it on slideshare.net.
Yeah, you can put it on SlideShare. All of these connectivity things are really part of what's made it useful, but part of what is really amazing about it as a blessing, why would I use such a loaded word, is it literally is an individual prototyping engine. It allows you to do design thinking at your desk because you have to kind of rearrange and mess with things to make sense out of stuff. So building a PowerPoint deck is an extraordinarily powerful way to think. Just like building a mind map is a very powerful, there's no question about it, the power of the act of doing it. Would you agree with that? And you don't have to be able to draw. You can drag and drop and click, but you can draw if you want to. You can actually do pretty beautiful stuff in PowerPoint. It's just, you have to work at it. It's a curse. How many of you have tried to present your mind map? Did I hear a nervous laugh over here? I have yet to see somebody present a system diagram and have people do anything but go, oh my God, how in the world are we going to get through this? Part of the reason is that we humans don't take in new information by listening to it. What you do when you're just listening passively is you're filtering based on what you already care about. You only really develop new information when you struggle with it. I have a venture capital firm now who invested a lot in a little company called Cube. And he's now trying to reclaim that investment. But they're doing a complete online medical school for a Vermont medical school. And he's done a huge amount of research on it. And they found out that these MOOCs and things that just push information at people do not result in a lot of learning. They result in information getting across, but not a lot of real learning that's testable. What you have to do, according to him, is you have to struggle with it. You have to do something with it. You have to play with it. I think this is why the D School at Stanford has bloomed, and IDEO is so popular, is that their way of working is all around being like an architect or a designer, is turning it into studio, is co-creating and doing it together. So those of you who've worked with Mandalas and built them collectively kind of know what I'm talking about. The temptation is to push this stuff at people once you've got it, because you now are amazingly aware of how it all works. And of course there's a meta message, which is, you stupid people can't quite keep up with me. Which doesn't, it's not so bad for consulting, but it's not really the highest and best use of a collaborative tool. So those of you who are working, I mean, any of these tools by themselves are benign. It's how they're used. And I think PowerPoint's fantastic because of its ubiquity. But the amount of businesses that are trying to run by pushing PowerPoints at people is just, I'm kind of with the school that says we're kind of dumbing down by that much use of it. So that's just a forewarning of what I want to get into. Now, I have been trying to figure out this visual field for a while. This is a page from my journal in 1977, I think. And there were actually 2 pages collecting every visual framework explaining the universe that I could possibly see. And some of you see the I Ching, the medicine wheel, the Kabbalah, you know, Tarot. I mean, those are the mystical ones. But then you've got situational leadership, you know, you've got Leccione's 5 dysfunctions of a team and its pyramid. You've got the Maslow pyramid. You've got unbelievable, endless number of 4-box models. Every consultant's got one. How to make sense out of this? And in the meanwhile, I just kept drawing. Here's me doing the history of Old Navy right after the meltdown in 2008, when they suddenly started prospering because they're a value customer. And in about an hour, we got a history there. I hadn't had any rehearsal on this. Just put up a timeline and then a big graph of this little thing here that goes across is their sales. Notice they're going up. And these little sticky notes here are the big product releases that they've had over the years. We got to do group storytelling. And oh my gosh, I have yet to see a group that when you do group storytelling like this doesn't come alive. Just totally erupted. Everybody got to talk, tell stories. So I've been living in this kind of world, and now we're you know, these are history lessons over here on the right. See, I'm not going to save this one. And this is a dot coding exercise on the visioning. Now, you might not be able to see the display up there, but it's basically a cluster display where nothing's connected. It's just a bunch of circles with titles, and everybody's dot coding where the heat is, where the action is. And how many of you have done this kind of thing? There are lots of things happening here other than the intellectual process of making sense out of a chart, because people get to, you know, talk to each other, politic, tell stories, rub up, see who's doing what. There's all kinds of social stuff that happens. And when you start doing a lot of change work, you begin to realize that people's brains are connected to their bodies. And that if you get their bodies to move around and actually feel their connections with information, different stuff happens than if you keep everybody in their head. And so those of us who do a lot of change work are really into all kinds of kinesthetic, interactive stuff. And it turns out sticky notes, I have chapters and chapters on sticky notes in here, are really incredible because you have to move around to use them. Everybody has to write and get up at the wall and do all this. It's all very good stuff. So I live in that world, but anytime I face and I know I'm heading into this world. This is Smart Technologies up in Calgary, which is one of the leading interactive whiteboard groups. They now have a 4-panel wall where you can shoot things from one to the other just by, you know, swiping it. They now have in their Smart Meeting Pro, we get 10 minutes left? Oh my God, okay, better hurry up. Anyway, technology, later. I'm into methodological innovation, not technology innovation, because I think we got plenty of technology. What we need is brainware. So turn over your sheet, the 11 by 17. And what you've got here is a key to the graphic universe that is held up since 1976. These are the 7 archetypes for making sense out of stuff on paper or display. And The key to understanding this is appreciating that the organization pattern in here is organized by how complicated the process is of making it, not the complexity of the artifact, but how complicated is it to make it, which is a process of making something and working interactively, and the process of perceiving it when you look at it. So I'm going to step through this one by one. I'm going to take the first two and not spend a lot of time on it. These are the most simple graphic displays you can make, which is simply to do something different on the left. That basically is what a poster does. A poster catches your eye, and you want to be able to have it be different. And if you want it to be really different, you give it a color. So if I really colored that up, that would be the first thing you would look at. So the art of poster making is the art of catching the eye by differentiating. Now you have complete freedom to how you do that. It all is contextual. Like if you look over there, how would you catch your eye on that wall? Well, you'd have to do something very, so three-dimensional avatar dancing. Now I could image map on your shirt. That would attract attention if it's flat. A list is probably the next simplest thing. It's simply a flow of information. And it's very interesting, when the PC started, remember PC Magazine and everything went all 3D and crazy with their cable. They're back to list. Your computer menus. How many of you actually use chiclets to get in and out of your computer versus drop-down menus? How many use hierarchical menus? Menu, submenu, submenu. How many? Raise your hand. How many of you use the chiclets, the little graphic ones? Lists are extremely powerful because you can scan them, and the main thing about listing is you just line them up. And a lot of people don't think these are graphics, but listing things. What is going on here? What's going on? There we go. People can just go down here, they don't think they're being graphic. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Clusters and grids are the next simplest format. A cluster, if lists in some ways are how we think about time. One thing after the other, chronologies, all that kind of thing. Clusters are how we think about space. So the simplest spatial display is a bunch of sticky notes, like what's in the front of your table. Now, the advantage, there's a tremendous power in not connecting the nodes. What do you think the power is of not connecting the nodes?
Free association.
Yeah, your brain absolutely tries to connect them. So if the connections aren't in the display, the activity backs up into the brain. So clusters are the way you activate thinking. If you put 3 or 4 things juxtaposed next to one another, people are going to start trying to connect them. So for brainstorming, all that kind of stuff, that's what you do. And gridding, of course, we live in grids. Grids are maps, data tables, budgets. Any of you work with budgets? There are people, visually, financial people, who can look at a grid and see the anomalous number. I don't know how they do it. They can see one that isn't added up correctly. I mean, do any of you play Sudoku? Yeah, it's amazing. You nines, sevens. It's a great validation of the fact we see what we look at. We see what we're looking for. So there's a lot of neuroscience to show that. So grids are great because they force you into this connectivity, but they're much more complicated. If you try to facilitate a group on a grid, you better get agreement that that's a good thing to do and have everybody agree on the categories. Now, mind mapping is the jump into diagramming. And I picked the word diagramming for any kind of a display that's a branching display. Now, we all know that there are quite a number, and if you look at the middle of your table, I'll bet you have some. Do any of you have org charts?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Okay, org charts are just a kind of an organized mind map with a grid under them, usually a hierarchical grid. What are some of the other kinds of branching? The mind maps, of course.
Workflow diagrams.
Workflow diagram.
Yeah, workflow diagrams. Workflow would have time on one axis, probably. Goes along like that. What's the one that's there on the picture? Any of you recognize, any of you come out of TQM?
That's an Ishikawa diagram.
Yeah, the fishbone. That's another one. If you start collecting branching diagrams, what I learned from Arthur Young is the entire plant world, the world of living things, is built on branching structures, all of it. And this is if you do a little computer program where you have a line, and then split the line, half as big, split the line, split the line, keep going, you will get a tree. It's a great example of a fractal, but it also is the plant world is branching. That is what it does. And that's what the DNA molecule is a simple sequencing molecule. And the key to this branching is that it can grow. That's what you get, is you get this incredible growth. So if you want to grow your understanding of something, this is where you use mind mapping. If you want to break out of the box of gridland and take people into the world of the organic world, and I think the big shift that's occurring right now is between engineering or the machine brain and the garden brain. So if you want to take people into the garden brain, mind map. Because the structure keeps wanting to grow. Jerry Mikulski will not talk to you about having the biggest brain system in the world. If you talk to him, he will not mention it. Maybe in the first 2 sentences. How big is your brain?
220,000 thoughts connected by more than 400,000 links.
Unbelievable. And it's probably expanding like the Big Bang, I'll bet. I mean, how much data is being generated per day on the
Linear,
internet?
and I put it all in by hand.
Unbelievable. So the diagramming is really incredible, and some of you now are poking into this next one. The next one is drawing. Now the big jump that I had in the keyboard was it was very elegant up to this point, and in Arthur Young's theory, grids are crystal land, diagrams are the plant world, drawings are the animal world that moves. And mandalas represent the human world. So this is really the story of evolution in graphics that I backward engineered into graphics. The jump here is when you point at something the audience already knows and they can fill it in. In other words, they project into the drawing something they already know about, which is, I call it analogizing. The graphic goes to a whole other level of understanding. If they understand the metaphor you're pointing at. If they don't, you have two things you don't know. The metaphor and the graphic. So we have, at the Grove, really explored drawings. And I just want to show you one example. This is what took us into big picture land. National Semiconductor was almost bankrupt. And their story was really, how can we take this space barge that had 4,000 little jelly bean things and no central processing unit and become the Enterprise? You'll notice there's the little Enterprise. And it's heading toward this great vision. And the wonderful thing about this is all these question marks. It was the time of re-engineering. They didn't know how they were going to pull it off. They just knew where they were, where they wanted to go, and they were getting everybody else to go on this journey. The Star Trek metaphor allowed every manager in that company to stand in front of that and tell that story coherently, because everybody knew Star Trek. And over the years, it morphed, and this is the fifth version. The ship took off, it changed shape, some of the vision elements changed, but basically it was underway, and we basically had 128,000 people in cartoon land at the systems level of thinking. And we had 95% vision recognition at the end of 4 years around the world. First time the packagers in Malacca ever knew what the company was doing. So, some of you, how many of you have added metaphor on top of a mind map? Pretty interesting, isn't it? Like, if you just turn it into a tree and say, what are the root elements? What are the branch elements? What are the fruit elements? You could do, what are the other kind of metaphors you might embed a mind map in? A sailboat. Yeah, you could mind map onto a sailboat. What are the sails, the keel? The sailboat's a very powerful metaphor of the relationship between stability and flexibility. The more stable the hull, the more flexible the sails. And these kinds of understandings are really important for people in guiding them to think about things. If you just present a blizzard of connections with no interface, no GUI interface to some metaphor, it's very hard for people to jump up to the system level unless they built it. If they built it with you, they can stay at that abstract level. 3 minutes. So that you get the metaphor idea. Mandalas are the last format. And a mandala is a Sanskrit word for archetype. And the archetype of archetypes is a circle. And universally it means unity. It means everything in the circle is kind of connected in some way. And so graphics that represent a mandala, and I thought I'd show you some. Here is Yosemite National Park's vision. Now this has got all the formats in one format. And that's what the mandala can do. I mean, you can have a grid, you can have a mind map, you can have analogies, graphics. So upward, see the list of their emphasis areas, those are the actual action plans. It's all in a circle around their central mission and their 4 emphasis areas, but it also, at the ground level, has little drawings of every single thing that they find very, very important. And at the end, we had all the branch managers working on this. They said, you have to have a guy lighting fires up here. So that little graphic was very important to them. You have to have the gray owl over here. This guy who mirrors the Buffalo soldiers, who were the first Rangers there. There's one guy who was on Oprah and does an amazing one-man show, and I had this person looking like him, and they said, no, this vision can't be about the personality. So I had to make it just anybody. But he's blowing the flute of their values. So you can take incredibly complex information and embed it into what we call story maps. Now these are done initially actively and then very interactively, where you go through versions and versions. And one of the fun things is if your architecture of your mind map or your architecture of what you're doing is pretty well thought through, people can do interior decorating all day long. And the interior decorating is changing the words. That, by the way, that exercise this morning blew my mind. I only had one word that anybody, every word I had wasn't on anybody else's list. How do we think we're communicating? That was a simple word. So the iterations, the back and forth about words is as important as the back and forth about the images as the connections. So you've got meaning of words, meaning of images, connection of images. How does that all these things are out of alignment in a lot of organizations. And the way you get them in alignment is through this interactive process of using graphics like language. Now, let me end this up, then we're going to have questions. Let's see, where are we? What is that? Something technically is happening. The wheel of death. I quit. They have quit. Let me get back in and let's pass the box. We got 10 minutes for questions?